This is a really cool story, and I'm kind of an Ed Fitz nerd.
So do you just listen to
Sing
that song?
us the ballad about
No,
Fitzgerald.
no, that song is
I like
obnoxiously
that song.
long.
It's
But
almost as bad as the one about Paul Revere.
what happened was the Fitz had 2 radars, but the radars were linked. So when one went out,
this
the
was
other.
that recent?
1976.
I was
Yeah, the
imagining
record-
wooden boats.
No, the wreck of the Evan Fitzgerald was a pretty bad storm in Lake Superior in the 70s.
Yeah. And so what happened
Sink on a
was.
lake.
Okay, it's not a fucking lake. That's the problem. It's an inland
sea.
sea. It's like sinking in the goddamn Caspian.
So what happened was she lost both her radars, and they went and contacted a ship that was
The lights are in series, Captain.
was about 5
We'll
miles.
make them blink out a series.
5 miles or so behind them. The Arthur M. Anderson, and the Anderson sort of acted like a guide for the Fitz and was like, well, you're coming in too close to these shoals, you should probably pull out and stuff like that. And so what ended up happening was they radioed the Fitzgerald and said, there's a ship 15 miles ahead of us, that means it's 10 miles ahead of you. And the Fitzgerald replied with, am I going to clear? And the Anderson said, yes, you are. And the guy said, good. And the Fitzgerald had been reporting problems. They had said, we have all our pumps going, we have a slight list, And at one point, they had heard the captain yell, I don't want anyone out on that deck. Why was anyone out on the deck with, 30-foot waves? I don't know. But, so, the pilot of the Anderson, I think, asked the captain of the Fitzgerald, how are you dealing with how are you doing with your problem? And the captain of the Fitzgerald said, we are holding our own. Which means we're doing okay, we're fine. 5 minutes after that, the Fitzgerald was went into a snow squall and was completely obscured from visual and radar. The snow squall cleared 10 minutes later, and the Fitzgerald was gone. Gone off radar, gone off visual. Just sank in under 10 minutes. And that's what makes it really creepy, in my opinion. And just...
Did they lose radio contact?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that you're not in radio contact constantly with the ship. If you contact them, if you say anything, then yes, you're in radio contact, but you're not always going to be holding the radio and talking to them.
Well, I mean, if in 10 minutes it's holy shit, here comes the waters, and then we're dead.
If the ship sank in 10 minutes, that is incredibly fast.
To me,
there's no
the only
time.
way that could happen, theoretically, is if they somehow ended up cresting the wave and went down forward
Straight
and just
into
went
it.
straight
there's,
through.
There's 2 or 3 possibilities. One of them has been that possibility. There was a rogue wave or something, and they went nose down. The other possibility...
They get pretty big up in the Great Lakes.
Oh, yeah. The one that's currently accepted is that they grounded on these shoals off Caribou Island.
Okay.
And tore some holes in the bottom of the ship that gradually filled with water, and eventually at that point it just got to be that they couldn't keep the pumps going fast enough, and they just sank. They actually, I think they decided they broke in half on the way to the bottom. I think that they came up with they didn't break in half when they hit. The other possibility was that the hatch covers, remember he was saying, I don't want anybody out on deck? The hatch covers had been noted to be slightly broken. It wasn't enough to pull the ship in for emergency repairs, but they had made note, you have to finish this when you go to winter dry dock. So that was, for a long time, that was the standing hypothesis, that the hatch covers had allowed in too much water and she'd sunk. But now, after they'd gone back and they'd reanalyzed the vessel, they'd gone down with submersibles and stuff like that, they thought, well, no, maybe she actually came in too close to the Caribou Island shoals and grounded and didn't realize it with the storm.
And I definitely think a shipwreck is a great transition to talking about evolutionary faunas.
Wait, did we actually start?
I don't know. Whatever. Fuck this.
James,
why don't you introduce us?
Hi guys, you're listening to Paleo After
Wow,
Dark.
be fucking enthused for Christ's
I'm tired.
sake.
You introduce us.
Why do I have to be the one that's always fucking enthusiastic?
Hi everybody, today
God,
we're going to be
stop.
talking...
Actually, no, do it in your 30s radiocaster voice.
Do it in 30s radiocaster voice.
Today at the Zeppelin races.
Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking today to you, today, tomorrow, for the rest of the world, into the future, on into this cyber web. Joining me today, talking about these important topics in evolutionary biology, we have... Well, actually, I sort of went away from radio's announcer, and I went immediately to... In this corner, we have, weighing in at about 230, 6'2", we've got James Lonsdale ready to fight. Pure muscle, that man. His competitor, weighing in at a lean 215 and 16 feet tall, we have Amanda Falk.
Very generous of you.
And finally, for no reason, there's a hobo that jumped onto the match, and he has a chair. Be careful of him. His name is Randol Wabine.
And who are you?
I don't know. I'm the announcer. God damn it.
Who the fuck is announcing this?
I don't know. Christ.
That is a lot of...
Why is there like a 16-foot tall, 200-pound person? That's a little weird. We should get that guy out of here. He's a little fucked up.
Basketball player.
Basketball player.
So...
It's Kansas. You know, there's a lot of tall people around here.
There's a lot of 16-foot tall, 200-pound people.
Standard disclaimer. This is not PG.
Oh, yeah. No.
People have been swearing for like 5 minutes. If you haven't worked this out by
really?
If you haven't worked this out by now, you're a dumb person.
James, it's for the kids.
Okay, so for kids, this is an educational thing, and you'll learn many new words and how to use them.
What the fuck?
We're also affiliated but not endorsed by the University of Kansas for reasons that should be plain.
See, Randall's playing a new segment. It's called Kids Corner.
Kids Corner, and it's him doing what to kids?
Well, no. It's a vocabulary lesson. Randall teaches you new and interesting words.
Do you know another word that begins with C other than corner?
Today's word is conflagration.
And that's beer up my nose.
You okay with that?
So do you think starting with the whole 10 minutes about the wreck of the Evan Fitzgerald, then that?
Yeah,
I think that'd be fabulous. Fabulous.
I feel like that's a really long con joke. Like, we got a lot of people just sitting there like, so when are they going to get to the signs?
Oh, shit.
Like
This is
what?
It's 11.5%.
11.5%?
Yeah.
That might explain why Amanda had 3 sips and started talking about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
It's called
Shut up, Curtis.
honey, that also might explain the Edmund Fitzgerald.
You know, the Edmund Fitzgerald is a beer.
Yes.
The Great Lakes Brewing
Does it go
Company.
down well?
It's a very good beer. Ooh.
Oh my god.
I just learned about a tragedy and I'm mocking it already.
Correction.
That was good.
I think that picked up.
Anyway,
So
I hope you enjoyed the weekly Michigan history lesson.
Weekly? You're gonna start.
No, you don't
I would
have
say
to listen to this. You don't have to.
You can start uploading like weekly Michigan history
Bye.
lessons.
Bye.
We'll need to check them though, because when it's just an hour-long incoherent rant, we can.
It just gets drunker and drunker as time goes on. So it's like Michigan's the best fucking place in the
There's
world.
like 20 minutes.
Michigan is the best.
The
place
20
in
minutes
the
of dead
world.
air when she
Detroit.
puts the cat on.
We don't count Detroit.
Detroit counts.
Detroit is
Detroit is
totally-
the only thing people think about Michigan.
Isn't it the
You have
capital?
to think of leaves and syrup.
Yes.
No, I think that more of that about Canada.
Okay, to be fair, Canada and also Vermont, but there used
No,
to be.
Michigan for me is militias and
That
pointless
was
wars.
only those crazy guys in Adrian, okay? And I
You
had a
tried to
friend-
explain to me why a state would need a militia,
They're not even affiliated with the state.
but they kill people for it.
Not without permit. What?
Not without permission.
That's,
Not
that's
without
not
permission.
okay. No, that's not.
Record the intro. Right?
God no.
So this
I'm editing
beer,
around this shit.
this beer is editing around.
I mean, including all of it.
Anyway, what are we talking about today?
This beer is made out of honey.
Burned us.
No, we're apparently talking about the beer being made of honey.
It's made out of honey, and it's not too bad. You like it, right, Amanda?
So, if I recall correctly, today we're going to be talking about evolutionary faunas.
Amanda, what's an
Consumption of
evolutionary
alcoholic
fauna?
beverages impairs your ability to drive a car.
Wait, only after drinking honey beer you can't drive a car?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or operate machinery.
That makes sense. I'm sure it has something scientific to do with honey.
And may cause health problems.
Let's see what James's drunken definition of an evolutionary fauna is.
It's pointless, is what it is.
But Amanda, I asked you, what is your definition?
Yeah, come on. What do you think of them? What are they? What are the three? Come on. How many are there?
God,
What-
do you know how
wait.
long it's been since I studied this
No,
crap?
okay, wait a minute. Let's see.
See whether
Hey,
or
the
not
first
she
time
can
I
get
heard
that
about this
obvious
was Friday.
hint.
What?
Seriously, you've gone this far in your career. I mean, granted, you do mostly taphonomy work, but you've gone this far without even hearing anything about the evolutionary faunas?
Really? Somebody who spends a lot of his time looking at Burgess Shale type preservation and having to work out what the animals he's shooting are.
Yeah,
hasn't encountered
but here's the
evolutionary
thing:
faunas.
you can go through plenty of taxonomy work, and you can go through plenty of taphonomy work and the chemistry without ever hearing the evolutionary fauna theory. It's just something that really hit macroevolutionary and paleobiological theory for like the last 20 or 30 years, for better or for worse. What did you? Oh, okay.
I had hair in my mouth. Sorry.
It's just the sleeping pill.
Okay, so evolutionary faunas. All right, evolutionary faunas. The idea is that you have a Cambrian, a Paleozoic, and a modern fauna, and that
Sorry to interrupt, but has that changed? Because I swear
All
I used
based
to,
upon marine.
I
fauna,
swear I
right?
used to hear it as Paleo, Meso, and Cenozoic. So
no,
was that-
those are the eras.
I know those are the eras, but I thought that the faunas used to match.
No, there's a Cambrian fauna, and we will tell you. I'll tell you
We'll
exactly why
explain
all of
what all
this
this
is trash.
means.
Um,
But we'll go in through the papers talking about Sapkowski's original data.
You'll talk through the papers, and I'll
Right,
talk.
because am I the only one who read the papers?
No, I looked at the abstracts. I was
Okay,
busy.
that counts, right? In an
I was
academic level.
I was getting depressed about goddamn bloody trilobites.
You know what? That's what trilobites are there to do for
It's
you.
okay. It's kind of integral to the evolutionary faunas discussion.
It is very
That is
integral.
true. That is very true.
So yeah, so you got your Cambrian, Paleozoic, and modern, and that at the end of these faunas, at the end of the Cambrian, and then the modern really starts at the start of the Mesozoic. You get this big faunal changeover, and different taxa are dominant. And it's because of these dominant taxa that you've defined these different faunas.
Yeah, there is potentially a slight circularity of, we see that there has been some transition, and so we define that there is a transition, and then we look and we see that there is a transition. But yeah, they've divided up Cambrian as in mostly being dominated by trilobites.
Cambrian is trilobites.
I think they also throw in like some plechiates in there as well as being part of the Cambrian fauna in
Wait,
the
did you
original.
just say polychaetes?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
That's okay.
We'll talk about the biases in this in a bit.
Yeah, there are lots of biases, but they sort of associate with it. Anyway, these were all done by Sapkowski in 1981 when he was doing factor analyses on basically numbers of families in classes.
Yes. And the Cambrian was trilobites.
And he found
Paleozoic was cephalopods, I believe, right?
Paleozoic is brachiopods.
Brachiopods.
Like that's the whole
Modern
Gould's,
was-
Gould's response to this is the brachiopods, ships that pass in the night paper.
Okay.
Where basically the brachiopods in the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, bivalves, and your corals and everything. Basically everything that we see, not Mesozoic or modern.
This is it. Okay. This is the interesting thing. I'm pretty sure I actually, the Sapkowski paper is the one I looked at just now, or just before I came here. And I'm pretty sure because brachiopods are very common in the Cambrian as well, he divided it into trilobites, cephalopods, and bivalves, but I might be wrong.
But that still doesn't make any sense.
It's classically in the paper written up multiple times about the brachiopods.
Yeah, because cephalopods really don't strongly take off until
He actually suggests that
In the Paleozoic, yes.
No. Here's the thing. He suggests that the extinction event
That's
at
true,
the
though.
end of the Cretaceous of cephalopods is artifactual, and that cephalopods are actually modern fauna because they're so prevalent today.
They're actually really reduced on his thing here compared to what they were.
Which one are you looking
That's
The
at?
1981.
Okay.
Because ammonoids go extinct, and ammonoids are super diverse in families as far as he is concerned.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
But
is
then
true.
he suggests that still doesn't necessarily preclude them from being in the modern. It's one of his discussions he talks about.
Yeah, all we've got left are nautiloids, which is kind of depressing.
Well, no, cephalopods?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in terms
You mean
of
shelled cephalopods? Yeah, no, we have plenty of cephalopods.
I know,
We've got
but
a whole bunch of squids, and
octopus. Yeah,
Tasty
I know.
calamari.
Okay, yeah. So Cambrian is trilobite. Brachiopod was Paleozoic, and it's not bivalves that are modern. It's mollusks.
all of mollusks.
Mollusks.
Yeah, basically that mollusks take over. Cephalopods show a little bit of a less of a pattern, but he says gastropods and bivalves go fucking
that's
crazy.
That's why I'm getting confuzzled.
Kerfuzzled and kerfluffled.
Speaking as someone who just taught the mollusca labs, yes, mollusks go completely batshit crazy.
But they don't.
Starting in the Mesozoic.
No more than no.
No more than anything else, but
So anyway, he did factor analyses on these. He saw that at least as far as numbers of families per classes, that he could group certain groups together, and trilobites were one, and with some other things that were mostly, he saw a pattern of diversity in the Cambrian, then a pattern of dominant diversity in the Paleozoic, and then dominant diversity in the Mesozoic and the modern. And so he made the assumption then that because you were getting these faunal packages, that this was an example of sort of slow and steady outcompeting. That the Cambrians were the first there, they were the most volatile, but that they ultimately got outcompeted by the superior Paleozoic fauna, and then subsequently the Paleozoic fauna took a hit at the Permian, but the modern fauna is modern because it's so great and it's competed. And admittedly, that's a bit of a straw man reconstruction, but it's kind of what's there. And a lot of other people have taken that to various different extremes. So I think we should probably at least talk a bit about the rise and fall of the paper itself, the strengths and its weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can get into some of these other studies that we have,
Yeah.
like Alroy's recent criticism, but he's a criticism not just of Sapkowski's data, but of Shannon Peters' 2008 response, which basically stated, if we follow Sapkowski's data, then we should be able to predict all extinction events, because there's just one that's going to be better than everything else.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. I think there are problems with both of the faunas, but the reasons that there's this disconnect is different between the Cambrian and the Paleozoic and the modern.
Well, I think there's potential issues actually with the division of the Cambrian fauna. Like this whole depiction is of the Cambrian fauna that it's all trilobites and that they massively die out at the end of the Cambrian. Where
that's
a lot of studies have shown that doesn't really happen. It's mostly due to the fact that these groups that we define in the Cambrian are paraphyletic, meaning that they're not actual evolutionary units. They don't include all of the descendants within them, and they're just evolving into other groups.
Yep.
So we get an artifactual pattern because Sapkowski is looking at these families, which we can get into a whole other issue there, but he's looking at these families that may be paraphyletic, that aren't actually monophyletic groups, and so he's showing extinction and like a preferential loss of families that's not there.
There's also a large preservation bias in the last part of the Cambrian.
Yes.
This is the other thing he does. He mentions Lagerstätten in the paper and then says, these are unusual, they don't mean anything. He's treating them as unusual rather than being the actual signal of what's there. And the fact that we just don't get it elsewhere is bad preservation, rather than the way he seems to describe it is there's just these occasional basins full of shitty relic things that are weird.
Yeah.
And everything else is just trilobites everywhere. He doesn't realize, it isn't accepting the fact that maybe the preservation is the
what
bias.
he's getting at. I think that's a little bit of an unfair comparison about what he's actually saying. In the paper, he talks about the fact that you have these Lagerstätte, but realistically, they only add maybe 2% extra groups, families, because there's so few families that get added through these Lagerstätte.
He mentions the Hunsrück specifically, though, and as if that's some sort of refugia.
The Hunsrück adds a ton of stuff, though, doesn't it?
The Hunsrück counts a ton of Cambrian fauna into the Devonian.
Well, okay, but in his eyes, you have a whole bunch of different Cambrian families, but you don't have any new families in the Hunsrück, and maybe you only have one or two. See,
they need to go extinct for the. Oh, okay. So he's saying
this is
it's
his
the tail
levels
end
issue. He's looking at things at a family level, and there's a big problem with this because what is a family?
Yeah.
Someone define for me what a family is.
It's a random line drawn on the tree.
Okay, that's our definition of a family, but how are they defining a family?
A meaningful unit that's above the level of genus.
But any level of anything that's above a genus can be a family.
Well, some families are just more speciose than others.
Some animals are just more equal than others.
Yeah. I mean, and this is the thing with the trilobites. I mean, we know that trilobites take a big hit in the Cambrian, and I mean that is largely randomly grouping paraphyletic things together. But then in the Devonian, they take another big hit, but the number of species doesn't drop. It's just all those species belong to two families. They're as common as ever. It's just that they're all the same thing. Yeah,
we have this weird conception in this data set which doesn't seem to match reality. I mean, he talks about in his conclusions this notion that Thankfully, our statistics have shown what we've always intuited, that if we look in the Cambrian, all we see are trilobites. That's all that's there. But as soon as we go into higher levels, we see the trilobites fade away, and it's mostly brachiopods. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of brachiopods, but there's a lot of fucking trilobites, too.
I mean, how do we define brachiopod species as well?
Well, I mean, that's a whole other can of worms, but that's a can of worms he would say he doesn't really care about, because he's looking at families, and families are going to be more stable, which they're not.
And then the other thing as well is, in terms of like the molluscan fauna, which he says just springs up in the Mesozoic, there are representatives pretty early on, and some of them obviously sit at the bases of families that suddenly appear in the Mesozoic. So that's, again, a fossil record bias.
Right, I mean, look at monopacopherans. Those guys are some of the earliest Cambrian fossils that we get.
And I think we need to back up
Those
a little bit.
are mollusks.
He did this in 1981. He did this before really any modern studies of phylogenetics were ever really taking hold. Like, there were still some computationally based stuff in the 70s, but as far as what we would consider to be like a rigorous phylogenetic method, it really wasn't there. We hadn't sequenced most DNA structures, so there was no genetic phylogenetic analyses being done at all. So a lot of the groups that he's even using may not be real, but we still, for whatever reason, there's still a lot of people that use this paradigm for research purposes.
Well, this was also sort of on the upswing of particular evolution in Chicago, wasn't it?
Well, this is an interesting point that I really wanted to get to. But first, I think, just as hammering home this notion for everyone listening, the problem with looking at things at a family level is that we can't adequately define what a family is, so we can never compare one family to another. It's a name that we use ideally for a monophyletic group, a group that has its ancestor and all of its descendants, that represents a real evolutionary history, but we can't ever compare them because, I mean, technically speaking, a family could be defined with one species in it.
I've got some of those. I've also got some families that have, 60 or 50.
So how meaningful is it if there's like a billion mollusk families with only a few species?
As I like to say, and this would drive people mad, the average trilobite family is the equal of almost any other arthropod order.
Yeah.
Damn.
And so, well, wow, we don't have all that many trilobite families. Well, maybe. We have a lot of diversity that's being, like, shuttered into these things that we're calling families.
Yeah, and it's sort of a lumper versus splitter problem at that point.
And when you do this at the generic and the species level, most people have suggested this falls apart.
Yeah, and that's given, bear in mind that the genus has exactly the same problem as the family.
Yes, it is given that, but hopefully there be at least a little bit more of a representative towards the species, even though it has exactly the same problems.
Yeah.
Because you could have a genus with 50 species in it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, getting back to this notion of particulate evolution, there's something that comes up in the very beginning of the paper where he discusses the hierarchical theory of Eldridge and Gould. And this is sort of Craycraft and Eldridge, the very sort of preliminary thoughts of hierarchy. And way before Eldridge and Salfie, like I guess 3 years before they actually came up with this massive paper talking about hierarchy theory. But it's interesting that he takes away from hierarchy theory that because there are hierarchies, we don't need to know any of the things below because all the things operating at your hierarchy are completely independent. And that's kind of how he's almost unwriting the historical or the smaller scale issues and saying, no, family is important. And I think this is a really interesting misreading of what they were talking about.
Well, I mean, what it's taking is the importance of the origin of phyla and bringing it down a level to the importance of the origin of families. And once you've got the family there, they're just going to keep doing the same sort of thing, and it doesn't really matter.
But I think in a more intrinsic level, it's an interesting misreading of Eldridge's hierarchy theory, because Eldridge saw evolution as this nested hierarchy, that you weren't actually thinking of it in a Linnaean hierarchy. A Linnaean hierarchy is discrete units, and that's how he's interpreting hierarchy in this paper. And that's why he's saying if evolution operates on a Linnaean hierarchy, the things affecting families are independent of the things affecting other things, and so family level is important. But that's a misreading. That's not what Eldridge was talking about, and I think admittedly part of that could be that this is 3 years before Eldridge and Salfie came out, which is a massively dense paper that even then people probably didn't read because it's ridiculously hard to read.
Yeah.
but noting that the idea of it's not so much these taxonomic hierarchies, but rather you have the individual, then a nest of individuals being a population, a nest of populations being a species, and a nest of species being a clade. And it's not so much that they're completely independent, but that you get emergent properties from the effects that are going on at lower levels when you combine them together. I mean, an individual can't sexually reproduce, but individuals within a population can sexually reproduce. These are just examples of how when you start to add multiple individuals to a single, multiple individuals, you start to get more complex interactions.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Eldridge's hierarchical framework, he's not suggesting at all that there is a complete total disconnect on each hierarchical level. He's suggesting that there will be some effect, but it's probably muted due to other interactions that get more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So I really thought that was an interesting aspect, and it probably was to do with the fact that it's a much earlier rendition of hierarchical theory.
I mean, okay, I have noticed we very, very quickly started ripping into this, and we're careful, we'll finish pretty quickly.
Finish pretty quickly ripping into this, or finish
Finish the podcast pretty quickly, because we're just like, yeah,
Crazy.
shit, done.
No, I mean, there are interesting ideas, and I think we can talk about that.
Yeah.
But first, I think we definitely need to attack some of these pitfalls.
And I think that the major, he didn't care how things are actually related, lumped a lot of things that weren't groups into as groups. Also, the arbitrary, we're going to use, I understand why you're going to use marine only, but ignoring the terrestrial realm it is a big thing, because...
Well, marine realm, I think, is largely a sampling issue. I mean,
yeah,
right.
totally.
You tend to have more continuous marine records. It'd be interesting, though, to have somebody do a look at... terrestrial evolutionary faunas, because we have things like the North American land mammal ages, stuff like that. So it's kind of been done,
Well, I mean,
but
here's
not
the thing.
exactly to the same scale.
You get insects in the Devonian, that's the age of insects forever.
Yeah.
You're going to go by the most dominant
Devonian
form
is
of
the
life.
age of fish.
Not on land.
No,
On land, it's definitely the age of
definitely
insects.
insects. Yeah,
But let's be honest, it's always been the age of bacteria.
Yeah,
Since
that's the other
bacteria
thing.
started,
yes,
Yeah.
Bacteria have always been the most successful thing on the
Yeah.
planet, and everybody assuming that anything else is more successful is deluding themselves.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, I guess actually as well, people will informally add the Ediacaran fauna to be one prior to the Cambrian.
That's true, and some of those things might actually bleed in.
And
That
some of
is
them, I mean,
possible. haven't they found what's the sea pen looking one? Damn it! All I can think of is Dickinsonia, but that's the weird.
Yeah,
blobby.
Dickinsonia is the
Dickinsonia is
the blobby.
draw a
Blob.
sea pen for me and I can tell you.
It's got this. It looks kind of like a feather. It's got the thing.
Yeah,
and
is
then
it-
there's the stuff coming off.
It looks like a feather. I can't remember.
Yeah. I
can't remember the name
It's
of
got
it.
a holdfast.
Yeah,
and
the
like
holdfast.
little-
Oh, wait.
Shiza.
It's not Shiza. It's not the German word for shit.
Because I seem to recall that they found some of those in the Cambrian. I don't remember where or
Okay,
when.
people have been describing, there was a,
God damn it.
I mean, this is something I know that I probably shouldn't know. There was a paper that suggested that they were having Ordovician Ediacarans being washed up on a beach, got tanked in review.
Okay.
But I mean, there was because I mean, people think that it's not Charnia because that's the holdfast, that's the disc.
Charnia discus?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the holdfast of the feathery thing. But yeah,
The feathery thing is what she's...
no, I know.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the name. But I mean, there's been a suggestion that these things, a lot of the diversity is because we're seeing taphonomy in action, like they're falling and rotting, and some of the diversity we're seeing is just degrees of.
Oh, so it's been
decay.
suggested that these things are just artifacts?
Oh no, that there are at least
Well, no, I
two
mean,
or three
some of the
species there,
species-
but like the massive
Oh,
diversity.
it is Charnia.
because it's the holdfast. So yeah, it's a synonym. Yeah,
yeah.
there we go.
That's what I was going to say. I thought
How
you were right.
dare you fact check?
Oh my god, you violated one of our rules!
It was bothering me, and I have the internet on my phone.
You
so
have
I had to.
you has the internet on your
I have
phone.
the internet.
Well, now you know what the C pen looking thing is.
And Amanda has now become the official fact checker for the podcast.
I only have so much bandwidth on my 3G.
Too bad.
You're suggesting that if you were constantly fact-checking the things we were talking about, you just completely run out of room?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's probably true. So have you fact-checked your wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald story?
No, I don't have to.
Oh, okay.
It's all up here.
You believe? Yeah, okay, so you're a resident expert at shipwrecks.
I am totally the resident expert at Great Lake shipwrecks.
If anyone knows about Rex, it's Amanda.
Considering my entire life is a shipwreck, yes.
Racing boosh.
So yeah, when we're talking about Archer references. Anyway, so when we're talking about particulate evolution, what exactly did you mean by that?
You explain.
You explain.
Amanda, explain.
Amanda
Yeah.
doesn't know what the fuck.
Randall explain.
Randall, explain
Seeing as you're trying to
particulate
get people in
evolution.
trouble.
Real, it's a generic idea that you
Yeah.
can possibly model everything as just particles in a jar. Essentially, that history doesn't matter, and that you
Yeah.
can treat taxa and life in general as just being entities in
All
physical space.
that matters is where you are, and then where you can go. And then when you're wherever you have gone, all that matters is where you are, and where you can go.
Does that sound like bullshit nonsense, or is it just me?
No, it's bullshit nonsense.
It
Okay,
is.
good,
nonsense,
good.
yeah.
But these
But-
the people that do it, it's the only way to do paleontology, and you shouldn't do anything else.
Yeah. To be fair, there is a strong contingent of people that would view anyone who disagrees with that as being completely idiotic.
Oh,
That you
well,
need
I'm
to,
used to
and
that.
to be fair, let's back that up. Bullshit nonsense or not, there is a degree of modeling in everything. And as my friend Matt, who's an engineer, always likes to say, you'll model a horse as a sphere if it'll help you work.
Here's the thing. Random walk is shown to be a pretty good concept as the basis for most evolutionary changes. Particular evolution basically is random walk, but then they just go kind of with it, like completely overboard.
I think the problem is that and this is just what I've observed and noticed, and feel free to jump on me for this, but I think evolution is
Don't
equal-
actually jump on her, James. That would hurt.
Evolution is not just random, but there's definitely a random factor to it. It's both random and not random.
Well, it's how you define evolution. The genesis of new forms is random. The preferential survival is not.
Exactly. So it's a combination of both random and non-random. I don't want to say selection, but you know what I mean.
Well, we can potentially get into an argument. Are you familiar with Gould's paradox of the first tier?
Oh God, it's been years.
And once again, James does a single tear running down his face.
I just wanted that to be like the last slide in your talk, just a gif of Gould with a single tear
Yeah.
running down his face.
The paradox of Gould's tear.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the paradox of the first tier is discussing the fact that despite the fact that natural selection is the thing that we can most obviously see in the modern, it seems to not have that great of an effect at longer scales of time. And so we have a paradox that the thing that is obviously happening all the time and is vital to survival of an individual population maybe doesn't translate up to a meaningful process at higher levels. And his suggestion was that evolution might operate at certain tiers.
Okay.
That you have this natural selection level, but then above that you have things that are affecting speciation and extinction. And this is where you get to potentials for species selection, species sorting, where certain things might speciate more frequently, or they might tend to be very volatile and go extinct more preferentially. And that's how you get these longer scale trends. But then higher than that, you have a third tier, which he said was just the random effects of mass extinction events. This is actually something that I think we'll definitely come back to because the Alroy paper really likes to hammer this home because Sepkoski's view, or at least people who took Sepkoski's data and their view on mass extinction events, is that by and large the only mass extinction events that matter are the end Permian, and that's just because, and the end Cambrian, and that's just because it's the rise of one evolutionary fauna dominating over the other because of its superiority.
Yeah, I mean, what they think of mass
But
extinction
Ken,
events.
sorry, just finish.
Yeah,
But Gould's opinion of mass extinction events was that it was basically this massive cull that could be selective, but not selective in a way that background extinction was. That it was random with respect to the usual status quo,
I mean-
and that's why you could have things that were speciating very well and doing great in a species sorting / selection fashion be completely cut down.
I mean, this is
Dinosaurs are a great
Dinosaurs and
example of
mammals
that.
is a great example.
Yeah.
But this definition of, or the interpretation of mass extinction's work comes back to a very Darwinian view, because Darwin himself stated outright that basically mass extinctions are just natural selection ramped up massively in a short period of time, because of the environment. So what Sapkowski thought is, okay, things get really hard, and that's when things that can't cut it in regard to other animals just die. And that's why the better ones survive. Gould's was essentially, it is random. You can just be unlucky. You can have survived 3 mass extinctions, and then the same thing happens again, and you've just changed slightly, and you're screwed.
I mean, I just can't see how you would look at the massive rise of the dinosaurs and then state, you know what? Those little rats there, they're fucking better. They're just gonna make it.
There might be more of them.
There might be a lot of them, I'm sure.
I mean, here's the thing. There was the one bit of heuristic, which is basically continuous or measurement data, that actually tends to fit in terms of extinctions, that larger animals tend to go extinct more often. The trouble is, dinosaurs were also still pretty small.
Dinosaurs run the gamut. But then again, I mean, there's also the argument potentially of mistaken extinction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other can of
true.
worms. That certain elements of Dinosauria didn't quite go, potentially.
At least not the KT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's this deep... This is the trouble
Well,
you get...
the mistaken extinction is specifically the book about potentially the fact that certain basal dinosaurs are birds.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's also the hypothesis that there are groups, things like some ceratopsians,
Yeah,
some ornithischians, that-
it's not a perfect extinction event if you actually start talking to
Extinction
people.
events never are.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the problem that you run into that is that a lot of the times you'll get these Paleogene deposits, Paleocene, Eocene deposits that are actually reworked Maastrichtian and
That's true.
Yeah.
It's difficult to
deposits.
know how much of those dinosaur stuff is actually just getting pulled up like rip-up class or something.
Yeah.
How much of it's a zombie taxa?
Zombie
Yeah.
taxa.
You mean Lazarus taxa?
Yeah, Lazarus taxa.
I like zombie taxa better.
Zombie taxa. You know what? Zombie taxa is just too much for the kids. You know, it's just so.
Well, I mean,
typical.
are we
But
talking
haven't we
Lazarus
already
taxa?
been talking
Hang
about
on.
how this podcast is for the kids?
Is zombie taxa Lazarus or Dead
Hello.
Played Walking?
Hey kids, why don't you go over to Randall's kitty corner?
He has a van and ice cream.
It's gonna be great.
It'll be...
Don't worry, kids. I'll
Touchy.
deliver you to James, and then I'm done with it.
You can trust me, I'm English.
Right.
Yeah.
Shall we talk
I
about
used to-
how like all of the 1970s English children's program like
Was creepy rapey?
creepy, rapey, pedophilia?
You can't... Look, that was Jimmy Savile. Okay, that is not on, Amanda.
I was gonna say, to be
That's
fair,
too
isn't that a
soon.
little bit too soon?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
They haven't finished the investigations yet as to whether the BBC were covering everything up.
Which is a little
So-
fucked.
That is
Yeah.
majorly fucked. Yeah.
So,
Anyway.
You know, status quo for the win.
Ray.
I was-
Public doesn't need to know about it because it makes the public safe.
That doesn't make any goddamn sense, Randall.
the public
don't know,
doesn't need
it
to know
can't
about
hurt
it.
Randall,
them.
is this the start of your dictatorship? Public doesn't need to know because it's what makes the public safe.
Premier Randall, there's an asteroid coming. Build my spaceship. The public doesn't need to know. What they don't know won't hurt them.
The strong will survive, and we will rebuild.
It was
with
an
the
honor
strong.
serving with you, Randall.
I'd say it was an honor serving with you, but you didn't really serve, and it's not really an honor. So, talking of taxa going extinct after mass extinctions, this is a slight aside. You're always going to get taxa going extinct before and after, because how quick is a mass extinction? There are still papers saying how long a period does a mass extinction take. The idea that the asteroid hit and all the dinosaurs just went, immediately, is
No.
ridiculous.
Oh, that's
It
laughable.
was the suicide pill. They all just looked at him and went, well, writing's on the wall. Writing's on the wall. Just
Or is it they just
Hey,
reached,
I think that thing's gonna hit us. Take the pills.
did they just reach the social point where they hit the lapse in the conversation and decided to end it?
no,
What-
that's it. It
what
was a
was-
cult.
I was
It was
like,
a
what was the
suicide cult.
What was the cult that killed themselves
The
because of the
Hale-Bopp
Hale-Bopp
plot.
comment?
The Hale-Bopp ones. I always know this one, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Shit.
Mothers of Invention?
No, it was.
Yes. Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention all killed themselves. It was weird. They just kept shouting, "Plastic people."
All I can think of is the Branch Davidians, but that's the wrong.
No
cult.
one is going
No.
to get that joke.
It's okay.
I got that joke.
No one outside
No one
of us.
outside of this.
Oh, yeah, good point. Shit.
I don't think it matters.
No, but it's another thing.
You remember a name,
me.
you lend it validity.
Oh my god. I think that 11% beer is starting to get to
I
you.
haven't drunk hardly any of it.
You refilled it. I watched you.
Okay, and I've already had paracetamol today because I'm still in pain from my illnesses.
Okay.
Oy,
He's mixing medicine with alcohol.
Mixing medicine with medicine.
I've made it snake oil. It's perfect. It does nothing.
It does absolutely
Hey,
not.
James, I have some Mississippi mud water you might be interested
No, I
in.
don't want cholera, thank you.
Moving on. If we're actually taking the pattern at face value, excluding all of these potential issues, what we have... What? You have something to add first?
No, I think we're going to say the same thing, so I want you to say it first. You say it first.
No, you say it.
No, you
Say it at the same goddamn
You say it
time.
in case we're
okay,
different.
ready? 1, 2, 3.
James.
I meant that you guys were going to say it at the same time.
What's your interpretation, Amanda?
Let's see. Yeah,
My
Amanda.
interpretation of what?
If the pattern of a massive rise in diversity that truncates at the Cambrian, then a massive rise of a different faunal assemblage in the Paleozoic, and then a massive rise of the modern fauna in the Mesozoic, how would you interpret that data?
Well, I would say you're looking at it from too broad of a perspective, but that's just me.
Okay.
I
Now-
think that's true, but yeah.
Yeah.
You obviously the Cambrian is a little bit special.
Cambrian might be a little. Cambrian might be a little bit special.
All those little
simply because of
retarded
sampling.
trilobites.
Simply because of sampling, and simply because it's the
James,
it's
you're trying to
only
be
the
PC.
second. It's only the second
No, we're not.
major go around for multicellular life, and it's a pretty big fucking thing.
Yeah, and also I think, at least modern reinterpretations, throughout the time we have started to see anomalocarids in the Devonian. There's
Yeah.
been suggestions, at least.
However, they're not very diverse, is the thing.
they're not very diverse, but still,
There's one.
They
we get-
limp through.
There's one that we know of from one locality.
yeah,
Yes.
from one locality. They're hard to preserve. There
Right.
might
The end
have
of
been.
the Cambrian is the closing of a taphonomic window, nothing more. The moment we
Middle
start,
Cambrian is
the,
closing
the,
of the taphonomic
the moment
window.
we start getting things preserved off shelf, we see all the fucking Cambrian fauna there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because all we're seeing is near shelf stuff in the Paleozoic.
So this makes it sound like it's more of a Christ, I don't want to say species replacement thing, but where you've got stuff that was originally near shelf and then starts moving out to more...
It was out shelf in the Cambrian.
It's out shelf in
Yeah.
the Cambrian too, but then you get stuff that's taking over near shelf niches, perhaps because of extinction events.
Here's the question. You look at a lot of my work on Eurypterids and stuff like that, and I mean we've got derived chelicerates in the Ordovician from Fesuata, unpublished stuff, but it's there. These things are in the Cambrian. We're not getting preserved.
Right. The thing is that you do get extinction events, and then you wipe out the fauna in one area, and you can get fauna, you can get immigration.
Recolonization.
Recolonization. Yeah, it's almost like coordinated stasis.
Yeah. Well, what
Yes.
this is,
Okay.
what if you take, and I think this is where you were going. If you take the pattern as interpreted by Sapkowski as literally, it's just verbose cladle turnover writ large.
There's potential for that. I was actually just suggesting that it's coincident of us looking at what exists nowadays and trying to write history backwards.
Okay, so no.
And looking that we have, here's what we have in the modern.
Yeah.
And look, as we keep going back, this is what Valentine was talking about, the percentage to modern as we keep going back continues to decline. And so we see we can fit things into families that are modern because we have modern families, and so we keep doing that. So now suddenly we have a whole bunch of classes that have a billion families because we can all fit them to the modern.
Yeah.
But as soon as we're going back, we don't have the modern to compare to, and part of that familial versus class bias could just be an artifact of how we're binning these things due to our knowledge of the modern. And that's also why the modern seems to go crazy and get all diverse compared to everything else, because there's a bias of what we know and what we're preserving.
And also, we have to remember that we're just missing rocks now. There isn't that much Cambrian left.
That's true.
There isn't that much Ordovician left, or Silurian.
And
We've lost a lot of that due to weathering during
Yeah.
the other geologic
I
time
mean,
period.
I mean, it is there, but you have to core it. You have to know it's there and
Right.
core
I
it.
also think it's really interesting. In the paper, Sapkowski states that most mass extinctions are just like background. It's only the end Permian that's really meaningful because it's finally when the modern fauna
That's
rises to
because
prominence.
well, not just that. He's looking at families, and families don't tend to go extinct except at the end Cretaceous and the end Permian.
But looking at this, I find this very interesting because I think it's weirdly biased due to his perspective, because you look at even at the Ordovician, and yeah, maybe there's not a major ecological turnovers, but there's whole swaths of biodiversity that completely snuff it. There are potentially free-swimming trilobites in the Ordovician. Admittedly, there's problems with how they've modeled and reconstructed their lifestyle, but there are really weird, unique biota of trilobites that just completely snuff it at the Ordovician and never come back. So that is a major hit to that particular group's biodiversity and their ecology.
I mean, the early and mid-Devonian, when you start getting the end-Permian mass extinction really actually begins at about that point, you are literally seeing a winnowing of biodiversity. It's exactly the same thing. You've got certain life forms just dying out, and then the things that replace them are all the sodding same.
The other thing that I think is very interesting is, sorry, just to completely go in a random direction, but it was something that was like formulating in my head and now it's gone, is this notion of an evolutionary fauna. I mean, we are basically massively mixing two major fields here, right? Like, we're assuming that this thing that is evolutionarily significant also is massively ecologically significant when we call it a fauna. We're assuming that there's a faunal assemblage, like a modern fauna that is this massive ecological block that just takes over ecologically. Mm-hmm. And that's why it has an evolutionary success. And I think that flies in the face of most of what we know about ecology, right?
Well, I mean, what it isn't doing is, while it sounds at some level like they're assuming the entire world, everything interacts, I think what they're saying instead is that in every single habitat and every single ecological guild, the basis for that these days is mollusks.
Okay.
Which still isn't true.
No. They're assuming that mollusks and corals are a massive keystone species.
Yeah. And corals, you could say they are, but
yeah,
only
corals, I would say yes.
But only because they're the current reef-building species. It's always been the reef-building species.
Yes,
corals are an exception that proves the rule. Generally speaking, in ecology, most of the time, biological interactions are considered to be transitory at best. It's whatever you need to survive. If you're suddenly eating a completely different thing, so long as you can eat it, that's okay. Mm-hmm. Your rare exceptions are things like corals, where you just have to have this one species or this one group. Otherwise, you don't have the ecosystem.
Yeah. The other thing this is kind of linked because they've tried to do ecological stuff in the Cambrian. The only reason the Cambrian is distinct is because we focus on the weirdness and not how similar they are, not when they're similar to modern things, and the fact that they're often the obvious, at least related to ancestors of things that we could name today, and we just lump them into their own weird thing. And they do the same. They think because they've tried to do ecological stuff with this, and they've looked at the weird morphologies, and they've done ecological sort of reinterpretations of what was going on in the Cambrian, and it's kind of weird, but it's because they're always looking at it as in this is the base point is this is weird. If you know what this is badly articulated.
I was gonna say, I think you just keep saying this is weird over and over again, but I think I get your point.
Yeah.
I just can't explain or explicate it.
No, because it's a metaphysical concept.
A metaphysical concept of disparity. That we can look back and say that these things look unique and different.
Yeah, and you know I'm hung up on disparity.
I know
it doesn't mean anything.
Well, here's the thing. It might mean something. It just might not mean the things that we think it means.
I mean, I'm interested in terms of perturbations in morphospace. Like, does this get re-inhabited? Not, is it more disparate or less disparate than something else from the Cenozoic?
Can you dumb down perturbations in morphospace?
Okay. So basically, in the Cambrian, you've got certain things that show certain morphologies, and then occupy a certain degree of what we term theoretical morphospace. So in relation to other animals and other animals' morphologies, they all plot in a certain point.
You can tell he's been doing PCO lately.
You can tell she's also been doing PCO lately.
PCA.
Sorry.
Slightly different.
Slightly worse.
Shut up.
To be fair, you don't use eigenvalues, so that's a bonus. If they then go extinct, is that point ever reoccupied? Or does something else that's similar but different sort of take on the same space? And this is the key thing. Different morphologies can take on the same kind of position.
Yeah, we see that all the time.
And I mean, bear in mind, this is phonetic. This is irrespective of actual relationship.
I mean, this is convergence, basically.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
It's not homology or characteristics that are shared through evolutionary relationship, but a convergence, like your
Ecomorphy.
Yeah, your ichthyosaurs and your dolphins.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Pterosaurs and birds and bats.
Yeah. And that's something else people have always... They said there was this big pterosaur bird changeover, but the birds were there long before the pterosaurs started to wane.
And it's really funny because if you look at some of the stuff coming out of China, you actually see that birds and small arboreal pterosaurs actually probably inhabited the same space and time.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really funny, in my opinion.
I mean, here's the thing. The notion of evolution is this locked Darwinian wedge. I mean... There is always going to be some degree of competition, but it's not necessarily going to be this massive, fight that if you're in the air, I need to fight you. So long as we're not directly competing over this exact same resource, who the fuck cares?
I mean, the basic point is to avoid competition.
Yeah,
that's
there's
everything's goal.
There's great examples of that if you look at modern warblers, North American warblers. Everybody's hanging out on one tree. But you can have 6 different species in one tree, but they're all feeding in different sections of the tree, foraging. Some are trunk foragers, some forage way up in the canopy, some forage down on the ground at the base of the tree, some are in the middle, some forage on the outside of the branch, some forage on the inside of the branch. It's a very diverse, so you're all feeding on the same plant, but you're in different parts of the plant.
Yeah, because realistically, you don't want to just start a fight everywhere you fucking go, because that's just going to cause problems.
The one time I think competition does play a major role, but again, I think I've had this discussion with you before, and you've said this is like the difference between a man falling and bleeding out and somebody walking along and deciding to just smother him.
You mean while he's bleeding?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you've got different animals on islands, birds on islands, so take Amanda's birds and they're on islands, and one island just got completely wiped out by a volcano. The survivors, which will be a very small population, trying to get onto another island and finding that the existing species already inhabit their niche and they just can't get a foothold and die. That's when competition can cause extinction. But the population's already so small that you can't be sure that it wouldn't be inevitable anyway.
And I still stand by my did the fall kill him or did the man smothering him kill him argument, because if you're looking for the primary cause of that extinction, it was the volcano.
But this is
I mean, don't get me wrong, the fact that the refugees weren't welcomed with an open arm was probably a really contributing factor.
Exactly, but they wouldn't have been doing that if it wasn't for the fact that the environment had already screwed them.
Right.
I agree, but I
No, but I can definitely see that as an explanation, and I accept that as an example.
Exactly.
Of competition
The only reason I ever bring that up is because there are a lot of people that go, competition never does anything. And so it's just a slight kickback to that, because there is never one answer.
You just really wanted to hammer that home, didn't you?
But there's also the issue of invasive species.
Well, invasive species are a whole different concept.
But why are they invading?
Because some fucking idiot let him go in Central Park.
No, Lebensraum.
Oh, Lebensraum. I thought you said Logan's Run. I was like, what the fuck are you getting at?
No, that's the idea that after 10 million years, the species just commits suicide because that's its lifespan.
Okay, you're old enough.
That is
Go kill
fabulous.
yourself.
The Logan's Run. Okay, we need to work on a paper.
We need a
Logan's
paper.
Run theory of species.
That'd be amazing. Nature. I can see it
We'll
now.
bring back racial senescence, but we'll call it Logan's Run theory.
So are you
For
gonna
people who don't understand, racial senescence is the suggestion that species go extinct. It's an old Victorian term because they become senile. It's retarded.
So are you going to calculate the Logan's Run lifespan for each group?
That hurt.
Although I've actually seen,
Amanda's dying.
Although I've actually seen more modern studies try to bring back racial senescence based upon genetic diversity. That through time, the species will lose genetic diversity, get more deleterious alleles, and just die.
Look at it. First world countries, birth rate plummets.
So you're suggesting we're experiencing it right now?
Yeah, we're all senescent.
Look at
We're just
Japan.
fucking crazy.
That's an accurate statement.
We're just scared of anything that's different.
Well, no. That's tribalism and.
No. They've shown that when you get old, parts of your brain shrink and you automatically become more racist because you can't empathize more with things that are different to you.
That is a horrifying thought.
You're different from me.
To be fair,
I
Randall's
hate
already
you.
there.
To be fair, he doesn't empathize with something that doesn't either look like or eat a cow.
No, Randall just doesn't empathize. That's how that works.
No, because to
I
us,
used to empathize,
because Randall only sees people
but
as
then
cattle.
I decided emotions were worthless.
So speaking of eating,
Yes.
I kind of need to eat.
Okay.
I think we're going to take a break for
Yeah.
lunch, and
Yeah.
we'll come back with
Tasty.
The other 5 papers.
He actually, he's not eating babies.
Hey guys, or rather, hi guys. Welcome back to the podcast.
You're continuing this. This is a continuation of you pretending that you really, really hate this.
I like the fact I forgot to be miserable.
It's like, hey guys. Oh, right. Hey guys.
Welcome back to this discussion on whatever we're discussing.
Today we're going to be discussing about, why life is just so sad.
Yeah, when did we stumble into a 1990s coffee
sad.
house?
1990s coffee house. Life is just like dark and depressing.
I don't know what those are because we don't drink coffee in England.
Yeah.
And tea houses aren't quite the same.
That's because they have opium dens. That's about the equivalent.
You know about opium dens. You've been in China.
I wish everybody could see the look that I'm giving him right now.
Everyone by this
James,
point has imagined
it's
based on
Where
the
do you
Randol
think she
podcast,
was
you say
spending
that.
most of her time in China?
What?
Where do you think she was spending most of her time in China is what he said.
Falling over on buses from what I've heard.
That was only the one time. And that was because the bus rear-ended another bus.
Okay, well, if the bus rear-ended another bus, then really falling over is the least of your concerns.
Amanda, you're getting involved with the bus's mating. You were interfering.
Yeah, it's a glorious thing. You should watch it for, the bounty
So
of nature.
you're in the mail bus?
Yes.
Yeah.
I suppose so.
Yeah. The other bus was presenting itself.
This conversation got very weird very quickly. Let's go back to evolutionary
But
fauna.
this conversation's more fun.
Shut up, Randall.
These conversations started weird.
What if suddenly all the buses went extinct and there were only bikes? Would that be a new evolutionary fauna?
Well, technically, you can look at China and claim that China has seen an evolutionary fauna turnover, because earlier, only within the last decade have you really seen a lot of cars.
From what I've heard, you can really tell that based on the driving.
The amount of air pollution is pretty bad. It was apparently very, very bad this year in Beijing. I wasn't there, but I heard that it was pretty awful. So you could make that argument if you wanted to talk about evolutionary faunas in relation to motor vehicles, or technically bikes aren't motor vehicles, but that's not the point.
The other problem is that bikes don't evolve.
The bike has not changed significantly in the past 100 years.
Well,
So this is going to be our last podcast, right? Like, this is just it, right?
Technically.
Can't go any further. We've talked about the evolution of bikes. It's like,
The
what else is there to talk about with
The
life?
highly apomorphic
We have a
penny
list.
farthing.
But bikes used to have giant wheels in front.
That's exactly what I just said.
So is that apomorphic or is that plesiomorphic?
Apomorphic.
It's apomorphic. So you
Because
suggest
that's retarded. Why would you originally design a bike with giant wheels? You'd only do that once you knew what a bike was. Nobody comes up with that first.
Well, you see, they thought, the bigger wheel they get
Monster
farther.
trucks do not predate cars, do they?
No.
No.
Exactly, QED. What does that mean?
quo era demonstratum,
Yeah, exactly that.
and thus it is shown.
We're not even talking about the horrible things Randall did in Randall's Kids Corner while we're off air.
No. We best not talk about that.
Tasty,
that-
tasty baby back ribs.
Why did you go Jamaican?
Because
Why are you licking your lips? If the response to that is just a wet smack on the recording.
Check, please. Microphone 3.
my God,
Randall's Kids Corner is brought to you by Amanda.
Randall, once
Kosher
again,
children.
kosher children. Ouch. That's dark.
Pre-circumcised, so you don't have to.
And we're back to cannibalism.
You started a
Sorry,
cannibalism.
the cannibalism.
You cannot place the blame on
Guys,
James
guys,
on this one.
walking
You
home
started.
for
No,
I-
we started the Kids Corner.
I'm sort of formulating a brisket joke. Give me a second.
Oh man, and then yeah.
It's okay if I have to walk home. I'll just stay here like I usually do, unloved and alone, with Curtis and Randall.
The rest of the unwashed, unloved, and alone.
Yeah, mostly unwashed.
Yeah, mostly unwashed.
Actually, I'm quite clean. It's more the unloved.
Well, I mean, you have to scrub up after you left the Klutz corner, right?
No, I'm perfectly fine
No,
sitting in gore all day.
He scrubs down to make sure that he doesn't have any errant skin filings that could trace back to him.
There's all that latex.
Anyway.
Full bodysuit.
Anyway.
Oh my god.
Where did we leave off?
We were
Well, I think
we actually left off at Randall's Kids Corner, so just before that...
we just started the conversation right back where we were. I mean, I don't know about you, man, but we're on topic. What about you?
This is what happens when one out of the three of us reads the papers.
Wait, how many of us are there, Randall?
Fuck you, Randall.
I was going to say I thought James didn't count as a human, but whatever, sure.
No, we're going old school.
We're going to measure craniums. We're going to measure...
You're going Mad Men on this thing.
No, we're going to measure craniums. We're going to find out which one of us is the subhuman. Curtis?
James, according to that, Amanda's not human.
No, she's very human.
No, James, she's Jewish. That makes her not human.
No, she's... Shut up, Werbine. German name, German family. She's human.
Shut up, Proto-Hitler.
Yeah, it's genetic clone, maybe. How is Brazil these days?
It's quite nice, actually.
To be fair, if anyone's a clone of Hitler, it's Curtis. He's got the dark hair and the dark eyes, and he's been to Brazil.
He's a boy from Brazil now.
This is going well.
You should save us, Amanda.
I'm trying.
Okay,
You're
start.
failing!
Do it.
I don't remember where we left off, though.
We
because
basically left off with a pretty good conclusion on Sapkowski's original paper.
Yeah.
Right, so that means we should start discussing the follow-up papers.
The 5 that you never saw.
Well, people have taken Sapkowski's papers and have suggested that they... This is something that we talked about...
Go away!
I want to know whether or not that got onto there. The hit me and then go away. Why do you want her to hit
No,
you,
she
James?
swung at me first and she missed, and I felt bad. I mean, everyone needs a win, right? So I thought she could just hit me. I just saw that episode of
Anyway.
Home Movies.
It's pretty good, isn't it? I love
Sorry,
that.
Curtis. Continue with what you were talking about.
And thus we got the Lost podcast.
The Lost, they're all lost.
Did it go down with the Emmanuel whatever?
The
vote?
Edmund Fitzgerald.
The
You know what? No. Now this all makes sense. We have to start with the Edmund Fitzgerald because it's a goddamn metaphor.
At what point did we run aground?
Maybe we did
About
run
10
aground.
minutes
I don't
in.
think we ran aground. I don't agree
we
with that
just
theory.
left the hatches open.
We hit a swell and we just went straight down.
We're going right in, boys.
we back to Goose going into the volcano.
Callbacks.
Yeah.
For anyone who actually listened to all these podcasts. Anyway, it's been suggested using this data from Sapkowski's pattern that we might actually expect that things in mass extinction events that are doing better or are capable of doing better are more likely to also, you guys are just staring at, every single person I am talking to is staring out the window and ignoring what I'm saying.
There was a raptor. There's also a squirrel right there.
See, I was looking at the squirrel. Where was the raptor?
Above the squirrel flying away. That's
Just
why
keep
I was
going.
trying to-
Just keep going.
This is like I am doing an entire lecture for 5-year-olds.
It's your fault for putting us facing the windows.
To be fair,
Okay,
that was,
next week, you two are over here.
Anyway, Curtis, continue. I'm sorry.
Now you feel like a hill, don't you?
not really.
Oh, okay.
See, unlike the rest of you, I don't have an empathetic response.
Anyway.
But we just
Missing the-
established
he's
before the
missing
break,
the
I
M.
don't have emotions.
So they've suggested that given this pattern that we would expect that things and mass extinction events that are already doing great should be the ones to obviously survive and recover, whereas we would expect the pattern for the Permian, the reason why the brachiopods preferentially go extinct at the Permian is that they were just inferior or there was something wrong with them and they weren't going to survive as well through long periods of time. And this is actually something, it's not necessarily the focus, but it's an element that comes into this paper by Shannon Peters talking about also a link between faunal preference over various stratigraphic elements, so suggesting that there's like a movement from siliciclastic to back and forth from siliciclastic to limestone regimes, and that's the reason why there's a preferential tolerance for certain groups to survive because they're better adapted to these things.
Okay, because that was a question. Listening to what you've just said, why would, unless we're purely talking about speciation and the ability to suddenly fill all the spaces, why would one thing consistently be better than something else and then suddenly worse at an extinction unless the environment of the entire world had changed in some way?
Well, but it's interesting that they're, at least for some of this stuff, I mean, it is potentially a massive ecological. You are still looking at squirrels.
No. That there's a look, Amanda.
We'll fix this.
On the tree.
We will fix this.
No, actually, I'm still really light sensitive, so that might help.
But there are cases where I could totally see massive actual environmental change, like in Permian.
And it should also be referenced that I'm probably the least up to date on this paper. I'm the only one who's read any of the papers apparently, and I didn't get through this whole paper.
Okay, so the thing with the end Permian is it starts off all green and gooey, and then it turns into a desert, but then it's green again by the Triassic mostly.
Mostly,
So
but
why
why
don't the other things come back?
Well, at the end Permian, you've also got the Siberian traps going off.
Well, that's the cause, probably.
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah. You've got a lot of shit going down at the end Permian, and the reason that it doesn't, and things.
I'm going to lift that and put that in my paper on extinctions.
Things do come back, but it's different organisms than what you originally had.
Quick refresher, basically, at the very end he does state that it's probably way more complicated than just a species area thing, but he basically suggests that the reason that you get this sudden faunal shift is a change in the epicontinental seaway environments. That you have a shift from a Paleozoic style of epicontinental seaway to a modern ocean. I just don't know if that's necessarily like...
I mean,
I
modern
don't even
ocean,
know
we're
how
saying
that-
like deep sea off shelf.
How would that even work?
I mean, continental drift is where he's got to be coming from this, right?
Well, he's mapping out like carbonate packages versus siliciclastic packages, and
I mean, if
seeing
that's the
how that
case,
relates to the biological speciation extinction rates of different groups.
So why do mollusks do really well in carbonates and bad in siliciclastics? That makes no sense to me.
Well, I mean,
Except that mollusks do fine in siliciclastics.
I think it's the other way around.
It
So,
sort
I
of
mean, but
depends.
if you
I mean,
the moment you're talking about differentiation and sedimentation, I immediately go to this is fossil record bias.
There could potentially be issues of that. I mean, when you're starting to throw in this, I mean, there are sensitivity studies that you could do, and he throws his methods section at the very end because it's a Nature paper, so you really don't have room.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about how he constructs the sedimentological package data. So realistically, I just realized I'm the only person who can add anything because none of you people have read it, and
I read the abstract, but I don't remember it.
I never got the paper. Stop making me
I
feel
looked
guilty.
at it this morning.
And what do you think, Randall?
He doesn't care because he has no
I
empathy.
played Saints Row the Third.
Consummate professionalism.
To be fair,
Let's just move on to the next paper then.
I mean, okay. Well, I mean, the main thing we can take out of this is
Let's at least take the idea, though. The central idea, as stands, is if there is this. I mean, admittedly, he says a single cause is probably not what's happening here.
Right.
But if there is potentially an environmental bias, that for whatever reason there was a major environmental shift in how, I guess, substrate bias for these particular things. He has pictures of brachiopods and mollusks. So his depictions of what the evolutionary faunas are very specifically geared towards these specific groups.
Right.
Things,
Okay.
yeah. But the main thing is Shannon Peters, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because it's that or Peter Sheehan, and I didn't think it was Peter Sheehan.
No, Peter Sheehan does very different.
No, I get those two mixed up because they have the same letters in their names.
Because they have Peter and
Yes.
Peters.
Yeah, and Shannon and Sheehan.
Yeah.
Anyway, but Shannon Peters comes out in support and tries to find a sedimentological backing for why there are different faunas, essentially.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea, but
As I say,
I don't know if it has any actual.
I immediately go towards the moment you say, okay, carbonates versus siliciclastics, you're throwing in an entire preservational issue that while it's an interesting idea, you you could explain why there's a difference, but the difference might not be a biological one in that case.
That could be very true. Mm-hmm. See, I don't know if anyone has anything else they want to add to that idea, or anything else they want to discuss just in general about evolutionary faunas before we keep going. Any bugbears or...
Next paper.
Okay.
I mean, I could keep talking, but it's generally tripe, and it just makes Amanda angry.
Aye.
Anyway, so Science Alroy 2010 suggests major shifting balance of diversity among marine arthropod groups, and sort of revisits this notion of the Sepkoski data set, and revisits this idea of this notion that's been set in that there are certain groups that are just evolutionarily more advantageous. So this is again getting at a little bit of Shannon Peters. Now you made me do it, you bastard.
How dare you unrail us?
Oh God! Now Randol is the only person that hasn't mixed up researchers on this podcast.
So Shannon Peters.
Yep.
This is getting at again the Shannon Peters notion that there was a very specific selection bias favoring this one thing that was always going to do better as these transitions happen. And Alroy is looking at this same data set and does some looks at the rates and suggests that this isn't really what's going on. Rather that the brachiopods were doing really, really great until they hit the Permian, and it's rather that at the mass extinction event, it wasn't so much an issue of the brachiopods being sort of doomed to fail and falling off the cliff, but having their recovery time or their evolutionary trajectory reset in a new direction. Mm-hmm. And he's suggesting within the paper that this could be evidence that there'll be certain groups that by random chance can weather the storm and they're not going to be negatively spliced and forced into this kind of dead clade walking scenario. Or brachiopods aren't really a dead clade walking. A dead clade walking is something that is diverse but never speciates and just slowly dies out. Mm-hmm. But brachiopods are reduced in their diversity through time. Mm-hmm. And suggesting that any mass extinction event, even the ones that Sepkoski kind of resoundingly ignores, could have this potential of taking an entire group and dramatically changing how they respond and how they recover through time.
Yep. I mean, we know extinctions at some level seems to reset a degree of the evolutionary clock in terms of how they, the degree of rapidity of speciation, and then you've got what we term the founder effect, which Curtis can tell you a lot more about, which is if the survivor happens to be an extremophile and it suddenly becomes speciated quickly, you're going to have limited the environment that those things can live in. So it might push itself to the fringe, even though it's still very, very active and very, what's the word?
Specios?
Yeah, group. It's still going to be pushed to certain environments, whereas maybe they were more generalists before. The other thing, and in terms of pure competition, there are two things to think of here. One is, what if instead of brachiopods being worse than bivalves, brachiopods were better than bivalves, and they just happened to be hit by the mass extinctions, and bivalves then got their chance, which is what a lot of people say about dinosaurs and mammals. It's equally flawed, but that's exactly the same evidence interpreted in a different way.
Yeah.
The other thing is micro versus macro faunas. So take crustaceans. Crustaceans today are the dominant arthropod group in the marine realm. We have crown group crustaceans, or at least very close to the crown group stem crustaceans in the middle Cambrian, but they're all tiny. Eurypterids, of course, are very, very dominant through the Paleozoic. Eurypterids go extinct at the end of the Paleozoic, and then you suddenly get tons and tons of macrofaunal crustaceans. So what if they've always been there, but then the size increases the difference, not necessarily the speciosity?
Well, I mean, to be fair in that, aren't you using a little bit of negative evidence, or do you have ghost range evidence to suggest that these things were further back than they're actually preserving?
I mean, that's a tricky question, because, finding something to define Crustacea as a character is really, really hard still.
Well, now we're getting into the bigger issue of arthropod evolution and how that's constantly changing. But
that's a different podcast.
I mean, it's at least, if nothing else, out of the scope of this particular work.
Yeah.
But I think an interesting thing that Alroy brings into this is he ties all this back into the modern biodiversity crisis. And it might be a bit of a straw man argument, but a potentially damaging effect that the evolutionary fauna argument can have on our preconceptions of the biodiversity issue is if we do think that the modern is this great thing that's constantly adaptable to massive evolutionary perturbations, we just think that it'll bounce right back from a biodiversity crisis, where he suggests that no, the history of life is about chance and these random events where suddenly a clade or entire group gets completely struck down and can barely, if at all, come back. And that's always going to happen, even with these things that we assume have weathered the storm and are massive, strong veterans. That it's a draw of the modern to be saying, this is what we know. What we know has persisted for this many years. It has to be important.
Yeah.
When
It also seems to me like this is holdover from a more Victorian era mindset where evolution
It's the escalator.
Yeah, evolution was constantly moving towards the best.
Yeah, Cambrian step 1, Paleozoic step 2.
Yeah,
modern
and it
best.
culminates with humans. Obviously, humans are the best.
I do agree that there's a weird bit of Lamarckian to this.
It's not even Lamarckian. This was a
Aristotle.
A prevailing.
It's Aristotelian.
It is almost. This was a very prevailing concept, and it really came to light in the Victorian period. And I finally figured this out. This whole time I've been thinking, this reminds me of something. What is it? And this is exactly what it reminds me of. It reminds me of this Victorian era mindset that evolution is moving towards a goal. It is moving towards the best possible thing, essentially. Where really, and it kind of treats evolution like it has a mind and it is cognizant. Where really, evolution doesn't give a shit.
I mean, the thing to bear in mind about the Victorian mindset in particular is they had that view of evolution because it was all about the onset of industrialization.
Right.
And the onset of the higher classes as a guiding force for the good of humankind.
Right. I'm not arguing that it was
That's
necessarily
why
a bad thing,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying that this feels like an archaic mindset.
Oh no, I mean totally. I mean, and they took views directly from Aristotle, and this is that is the onset of your social Darwinism, which is a particularly dark and really
Yeah, it's bad.
like bleak side to how people interpreted the origin of species.
Are we going to have Comstock references at this point?
No, I have a sentence, but it's not coming. So if somebody wants to talk, that'd be
If
great.
somebody wants to talk about social Darwinism, you kind of pushed us into like literally a quagmire of pain
No,
and
I was
suffering.
I was gonna go back to talking about the God damn it!
James, will the circle ever be unbroken?
If you drown yourself,
If you drown yourself. Spoilers.
you should know. Who knows what we're talking about? But you should totally drown yourself. I'll baptize you.
Anyway, that's
I'll get an online thing. Oh no, that's what I'm gonna do.
right. Anyway, so that's
I'll baptize you.
This
You're going
Victorian,
to give it...
Yeah.
yeah,
a Victorian notion of progress. That
Right.
things that are alive today have to be alive today because they were better, not
Totally.
because they were lucky.
Exactly.
Is this linked as well to a plenitude point of view and B, a cone point of view? The idea that while there are these faunas, things are much more diverse today, and things have just kept getting better. And this is again a cone versus an inverted cone versus a cylinder argument. In terms of
So to describe a little bit of what you're talking about, you're referring to like diversity estimates, the idea of whether or not there's like an infinite amount of possible diversity,
And
or whether or not we're
diversity-
truncated.
and
Yeah.
diversity through time, saying that things started out very not diverse, and then as we go through time, we see a increase in diversity
Yeah.
levels.
All right.
and what you're
So
seeing,
you start out as a cone with a very narrow amount of species, and then as you go, you get
It-
more and more.
it's wider and wider.
It's the
Wider
base
and
of a
wider.
bonsai tree.
Yeah.
But mass extinctions are points where the guy comes in with the scissors.
Yes.
So that's why that doesn't perfectly translate out.
But, and then this is the other thing about mass extinction in terms of the current biotic crises, even taking Sepkoski's ideas literally and saying, okay, so these things are going to bounce back.
And to be fair, I think Sapkowski really was probably more prescient on some of the failings of his own ideas, especially in that first paper, than some of the people who have taken the idea.
There were some very interesting either footnotes or aside comments in Figure Legends, where it's like, this is a problem here, and he says, if you look at his main figure, he lists every way in which it's flawed.
Well, he has this one point where he says there might just be an issue of how we're dividing things up based on families. I'm like, wow, that's really great. So we did it at the order level as well. And I'm like, you did not understand what the problem was.
Well, here's the
I
thing.
understand what the problem is. I'm just going to ignore it and go the opposite
The
direction.
interesting thing is that if you look at the phylum level, no evolution has happened since the Cambrian.
No, it's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just have a
So
bunch of
it's just
phyla.
stagnated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing's happening.
But even looking at Sepkoski's family level data, and you can see this in his original data, even given the fact that once something becomes extinct, the better things populate, you're still looking at a million-year fuse, or millions of years in terms of just basically a barren Earth before things begin to speciate again. After every extinction, you'll end up with a few key species which kind of have a global distribution. You see this mostly at the end Permian when you've got certain mammal-like reptiles that are just everywhere. Mm-hmm. You're seeing it now, by the way. We're spreading rats and sheep and rabbits everywhere, and they're just pushing everything else off. We are basically causing iron mass extinction and getting to the end effect of there being globalized species with very little diversity.
One other
Fucking giant snakes.
One other interesting thing that that Al Royce kind of summarizes a little bit is discussing the fact that there does seem to be very little link between the faunals and any other ecological attributes that you might expect them to be associated with, like their mobility or any other things. And if you take sampled data sets, you can get a three-way pattern in a factor analysis that is just generated. So it's possible that he suggests that you might just be getting a random, seemingly statistically meaningful effect. And that's what you're getting out of these factor analyses.
Is this partly coming from treating the fossil record as pure data in a particular system, and then you can start getting p-values out of nothing if you look hard enough?
Statistics is something that you can, if you become a little bit too, I don't know how else to put this. If you start to believe too much of your statistics without questioning why you got them or why you did those tests, like a true statistician will question why you started the test in the first place, ask, if you did this, what else could you get, and wouldn't just stop when they get an answer. Mm-hmm. Whereas a lot of times in science, when you're doing statistics, you get an answer and you're like, oh, I'll stop. And you don't run a billion other tests that could show contrary data.
Uh-huh. This is what I was talking to Amanda very briefly on the way over about phylogenetic stuff and how once you run the analysis, it doesn't end.
No, that's why doing a phylogenetic analysis and doing it well.
Two different things.
Wasn't going to go that way, but thanks for being, all negative Nancy on us, asshole.
Guy.
No, I'm saying it takes time.
It does, yeah.
3 years later, finally got a result.
Fuck no, you do one and then just keep adding to it.
Yeah, it's taken 3 years to run one.
No, not with TNT. It takes 3 minutes to get one ready. 3 years to take one ready. It takes 2 minutes to run it. Then you find out it's junk. Anyway.
So that pretty much was it for the Alroy paper, that they looked at this and suggested that no, the patterns that they modeled, they reran a factor analysis, still got the actual, the three faunas, but they did suggest that could just be partly artifactual. They did an updated version. Uh-huh. They didn't get the exact same eigenvalues because they updated their taxonomy.
Mm-hmm. Eigenvalues aren't always bad, see?
Eigenvalues aren't always bad.
You were the one who said they were.
It was a joke.
Eigenvalues? James, why don't you explain to Randall what an eigenvalue is?
It.
So not it.
Wow, that just is all red.
Fuck you, Randall. Find out for yourself, like I had to.
How about for our listeners, James?
Fuck them. Okay. Basically, in regards to PCO, which is how I do it, essentially what you're doing is...
Principal components, or principal coordinates.
Principal coordinate analysis. It's a case of you take real data, but because for principal coordinate analysis we're using discrete data, we create a buffer zone. And so we deal with spheres rather than single points, which is what Amanda does with her principal component analysis. And so eigenvalues are essentially values that are generated from adding wobble to the data.
Yeah, and it shows you how much each individual component has in the affects the variation.
Okay.
It's not exactly how I wanted to put that, but it's the best way.
We're going to be lynched by statisticians, but...
That's okay. We'll be lynched by lots of other people before statisticians. Especially at the end of this podcast.
PETA, child safety organizations.
I don't know. I mean, how is your NAMBLA membership coming along, Randall?
Well, unfortunately, I don't look enough like Marlon Brando, or is it?
I don't...
Are you going to get sued by the estate of
Marlon
Brando?
Is in NAMBLA? What the fuck is wrong with you?
Right,
the other NAMBLA.
You're doing a South Park joke with the National Association of Marlon Brando Lookalikes.
Here's the trouble. Okay, here's the trouble. When you do in-jokes that half of us don't get, How is the audience going to get those in jokes?
Because I'm assuming this audience has already watched South Park.
Yeah, that's an assumption you probably can't always make.
Are you assuming that our audience is horrible people?
Well, judging by our hosts.
Who's hosting?
You are.
Wait, is this why this is terrible?
To be fair, you did start off with a, hi everyone, we're going to start a podcast.
Hey everyone, so I guess we're going to keep talking about the stuff we've been talking about for the last half hour.
Anyway, does anyone have anything else they want to talk about?
I don't think
that
anybody has
Faunas?
energy left.
Fuck off, Randall. I've
James
got
still
something
has
to
fighting
ask.
him. James still has fighting him.
At least when you got your back turned.
To be fair, that's how you handle most of your fights, right?
That's
James,
I mean, to be
Never be alone.
honest, the best way to win a fight is if the other person doesn't know they're in one. The question I had in regards to these studies, has anyone ever looked at this in terms of the relationship of these things to each other, or is it always pure taxonomic count?
I think these kinds of studies have always been pure taxonomic count. The interesting thing is that the pattern tends to fall apart at the genus and the species level. So it seems to be a pattern that they see only at the family level, which maybe that's meaningful, but chances are pretty good that that might just be an artifact of your, of how you're defining things. And let's be honest, you can't compare genera to each other. You can't compare families to each other because you're just deciding arbitrarily. And arbitrarily is maybe a mean way to take it. It's a taxonomic term. And
But it meant something to the person that defined them. It doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to anyone else.
But a family is a taxonomic term, and you're trying to find, or at least when you're defining these things, you're trying to find a few characteristics that define whole groups.
Yeah.
And
It's the
what
best definition at the time.
Yeah, and what you're doing there is you're basically hoping that you're finding homology statements that define a clade. And that clade is one monophyletic group, which, as I said before, has the ancestor and all of its descendants and is a meaningful group. The problem is...
You're ignoring the importance of paraphyly.
Oh, shut up. The problem is that you can define a clade anywhere.
Yeah.
And so whether or not you call that a genus or you call that a family is really arbitrary.
Yeah.
And that's why you can't compare them to each other. The only things you can compare are your little end members, your little species that are defining your clades. Because if nothing else, that's what we consider to be the basic bit of diversity. Mm-hmm. There are people outside.
Yeah, I was a little disturbed that there were people walking through your backyard.
They use that as a highway.
Okay, good to know. They also look like
Amanda's
high
planning on
schoolers, so.
burying bear traps back
Have you ever
there.
thought of just getting a big dog?
No, I have never thought about just getting a big dog.
How about a rifle?
No, there's Randall.
That one's got a skateboard. I mean, you can't trust them.
You can't trust people with skateboards?
No, they're going to break your windows and steal your stuff.
So we're getting back to this conversation about when you get older, parts of your brain shrink.
I'm not that old. I should have at least another 27 years left.
Anyway,
James, you're British. It already started small.
I'll have you know, we measured our brains in biology class in undergrad. Mine was quite large. It was over 3,300
James,
cubic
there
millimeters.
You're
is
talking
no
about the entire
good
brain,
way
not that
this
one
can
sector.
end. Can we just stop this
I
before
mean, come
it
on,
goes
Randall, with
any
your
further?
sloping cranium, seriously.
You do know the largest brain size was like Oliver Cromwell, right?
Yeah, but that's because it pushed into his ears and everything.
Anyway, do you have anything else to add?
Other than the fact that without an idea of these relationships, we're going to be overestimating the amount of turnover in terms of...
I think that's your big issue, is
Yeah.
since you need to have some degree of evolutionary relationships, even to know the family relationships, you might be naming a lot of families that aren't actually named by groups that are evolutionarily meaningful.
Yeah.
Right,
And that
they
means
might not be real.
they grade into something else.
Yeah.
And if they do that, then guess what? You're going to have a lot of families that are going to exist where they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
All right.
Is this kind of what the trilobite paper gets into? Although I read it, and it seemed to be talking about...
The trilobite paper is
different-
actually looking at something very different.
Yeah.
What the trilobite paper is looking at is the okay, so there's a paper, I think it's 1999, a drain 40 in Westrup. They're talking about diversifications and radiation patterns. And so if we're following the idea that the evolutionary fauna is this kind of meaningful thing where everything goes, this Cambrian fauna that is trilobites, it goes extinct and it doesn't ever really recover anymore, then the proliferation of the things in the Ordovician is the proliferation of the Paleozoic fauna, because now suddenly they have their chance to be awesome. Well, what they found is in the trilobites, you see a radiation in the beginning of the Ordovician that is contemporary with all the other things that are radiating. So it's not not like the trilobites are just being left behind and they're this vestigial mess that stays around. They radiate just like everything else.
Right, well, I mean, you worked on that, for God's sake. You see multiple radiations of trilobites even after the Devonian extinction.
Yeah, you see it after the Devonian, you see it after the Ordovician. These things aren't just like dying out completely. They're actually radiating after these major events, and the suggestion that the radiations are entirely because of the success of this evolutionary fauna can't hold water because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, and the interesting thing about that paper was I assumed it was going to be about how a lot of the Cambrian things aren't real groups, that they're paraphyletic in regard to post-Cambrian
That's
groups.
some of the more recent work that they're looking at.
Yeah, and I was interested to see that there are other ways to tackle the same problem and kind of get the same answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More recent work, similarly, has started to say not even do they radiate, because we see massive increases of speciation in the early Ordovician, but a lot of these groups that we assume just go extinct are actually like the representatives of Ordovician fauna that are just so early and so basal that we've misdiagnosed them as something else.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this causes problems because, in terms of working out relationships, characters, and polarity, which is the more primitive or older, generally, character, and which is the more derived one, because people have been lumping these groups almost randomly in some cases, working that out is really, really difficult, and that's really important for working this sort of thing out. The interesting thing is that, like, say you take these the supposedly pelagic trilobites with the
cyclopygids, they have basically like Geordie LaForge visors over their face. They just have this one massive eye. That's why they're called cyclopygids, because they look like cyclopses.
Do we have any of those?
Do we have any in the collections? No. It's also really rare to get them with the eye on because the eye tends to break off or fall off. But when you do get the eye complete, it's crazy. You can see that they are two eyes that have melded together because they thin really close to the center line.
Oh,
cool.
Man. I'm bummed we don't have one of those. I'd like to see it.
The downside to that model is that they assume they swim upside down because they assumed that they'd swim like limulus, because people keep thinking that horseshoe crabs are closely related to trilobites, which they're probably not. The really interesting thing about those is when is their heyday, more or less?
I mean, they are pretty much strictly Ordovician.
Okay.
I think there might be some people who are suggesting there could be a late Cambrian origination, but cyclopygids are strictly Ordovician.
So, given the idea for their method of life, and given the idea as well that harpatids are filter feeders that sat on the mud and had holes in the side of their head.
I would say these are ideas that
these are bullshit ideas.
We don't have any evidence for.
No,
I was going to be kind. You just swore.
Shut the fuck up.
I thought shit wasn't a swear word anymore. I thought we'd been desensitized.
You're saying we're a post-shit world?
There's only, to be honest, when I grew up, crap was a swear word, and now people could say it all the time.
That's true.
Which I still feel.
Anyway, continue with the harpies.
Yeah. So what we're seeing, and they at the earliest have an Ordovician origination. So we're seeing post-Cambrian trilobites really start to diversify in terms of morphology, because before that, they're all tychoparid bullshit, crappy things.
Yeah. There's a lot of different families, but at the same time, there's a lot of very similar body forms. They go through massive disparity changes in the Ordovician.
Yeah.
They look crazy.
So I would say that in terms of different forms, it's not until the Ordovician that trilobites really come into their own. And then things like the cyclopygids go extinct, but then there are certain proetids which are they're from the Ordovician onwards, but they really become the only trilobites around post-Devonian. There are certain proetids that their eyes become really large and they begin looking really like cyclopygids. So it's not like they were losing that habitat. The trilobites were still sort of like staying in there. It's just it was happening convergently once things became extinct.
No, definitely. I think this assessment of the trilobites as just existing in the Cambrian is a little bit of a little bit of like relegating them to this one area when it's not realistic. But then again, maybe this is an issue of I work on trilobites, so I have a very biased opinion of this.
I mean, I've only started looking at them properly, but you you don't really get really good characters for defining the different groups until you get out of the Cambrian. Everything looks very similar. Now,
There could be a taphonomic issue with this. I mean, most of your Cambrians are smashed bugs. There's even been some people who suggest that some of the groups would lump back together in the Cambrian if we were to take and reconstruct three-dimensional preservation, that some of these things that we're saying are one thing are actually another thing that's just been crushed.
yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. And I mean, there are definitely, I think, on an Ellis, people say that a lot in terms of the number of species.
Yeah.
The compaction of the head can be really important. But at the same time, I see the same thing in Eurypterids. In the Ordovician, there are certain key groups you can identify, but for the things that fit at the base of the tree, they all look the same. And it could just be that we're looking at a really long fuse for trilobite diversification. Yes, they occurred in the early Cambrian, but they didn't really start diversifying until later on.
Was that Lieberman and Eldridge 1996 that they suggested that through biogeography there was a massive pre-Cambrian fuse to trilobite
I
diversification?
think so. They're
Yeah.
cryogenian origin.
Yeah, like a cryogenian origin,
Yeah.
suggesting that it even went that far back, way before the Cambrian explosion, just based upon how you would have to reconstruct the biogeography, that things would have had to have been closer to a supercontinent and then broken up, and that was one of the major things that resulted in trilobite diversity.
That's definitely possible. It's a very interesting and feasible idea. I think the fact that we either trilobites had, and I mean, this again could be a lack of competition, to take a very biotic view in the Cambrian, that they all looked very similar, and they're all doing very similar things that only began to diverge from each other in the Ordovician. The other thing is, we don't know a lot of their larval forms. If the larva had a greater dispersibility, maybe they do have a shorter fuse, but could just disperse a lot more when they're younger.
I mean, there's been modern studies, though, that suggest like dispersal of larvae does not actually equate to your biogeographic range.
Well, no, because you'll disperse and you might be, look at plankton. They're global when they're dispersed, but the species only come to the same places when they reach their adult form again and again and again.
Anyway, we could keep talking about this, but Amanda looks like she's punching herself in the face repeatedly to get us to shut up, so...
No. I'm just getting a headache.
Oh, okay. Do you need Tylenol or
I
something?
have some with me.
Okay. Well, anyway, I think that might about do it as far as our rambling rants about shipwrecks and mass extinctions.
Okay, so I guess just like it's not sentient, salient points in terms of evolutionary faunas.
Salient points about evolutionary faunas. It's possible that they're just a random assemblage of coincident peaks.
Mm-hmm.
Since we don't know anything about the relationships between the groups that they're talking about, it's a little hard to actually make any interpretations.
There are potential issues with the artifactual data if these families are actually comparable in the first place. And even then, this interpretation that it's this rise to prominence of something that is competitively superior is likely biased due to our present view looking into the past.
Mm-hmm. Randall, as someone that never heard the term until 2 weeks ago, what are your thoughts now?
I have no idea what the fuck you guys are talking.
So basically, you're signing yourself off of this whole podcast. That this is it. You're dead. This is dead to you.
No. Just certain people are dead to me.